not only for coming here, but because they helped me a lot. I had a problem with my flights, and they took care of it. So, Javier, thank you very much. I'm coming from Greece. I'm a historian of medicine. I studied in Athens, University of Athens, and this is an old research that I wanted to set a new light in it, and like a rebirth project. And it's a byproduct of my main research, which is the history of the Hellenic Pastel Institute. And the main reason I found out about this case was that Dr. Arnaud, which was a French doctor, that was his initiative to create the Hellenic Pastel Institute in Greece in 1920, was involved in this case because he was the reorganizer of the health service of the Greek army. As you may know, Greece started as a very small kingdom in the 19th century, and with the Balkan Wars, it became larger, twice in size and population. So the Balkan Wars were the main, let's say, expansion of the Greek state, and the most important one. So it's very important for the Greek history, but also it is important for the modernization of the Greek state, because Greece was subject of the Ottoman Empire, so they believe that Ottomans are backwards. And sorry for my English, but I have a lot of years to come out from Greece and speak in English, so bear with me. So the Ottoman culture was considered to be very repressive and very back-looking. So they looked to the Western societies and science and tried to modernize the Greek state in all other respects, and mainly in the public health respect. So the first thing they did was to modernize the Greek army and to fight in the Balkan Wars, and it was a success. So in the Balkan Wars, there was a problem with cholera, which was in the main area, in the Macedonian area, not only the Greek Macedonia, but also Bulgarian, Serbian, Albania, and so on. And the official narrative of the Greek history is that only Greece managed to suppress the epidemic because of the mass vaccination program. So it's a triumph of a Greek medicine. That's a phrase from the official narrative. And it was the first mass vaccination in Greece. Not only first, but the first mandatory vaccination, but not for all, as we will see afterwards. So, the case of the cholera in the 19th century and early 20th century, it's very basic for the history of medicine, considered with the wars, because most of the soldiers in these centuries, they were dying from diseases and epidemics, and not in the battle. So there was an effort to try to prevent this disease and epidemics. So this is important not only for Greece, but for other countries as well. And it is important because this program, kind of programs, they were implemented in the First World War with great success. As Latour said, World War I was a triumph of modern hygiene. And I think one of the reasons was the mass vaccination programs. There weren't any big epidemics during the First World War. There was afterwards, there was the Spanish flu, of course. But anyway, during the battles, there was no epidemics. very big epidemics. So, let's back to it. This case now. I wanted to, it's my first time I do this kind of presentation, so I wanted to read the abstract of the paper, so you will all get the basic idea, and then I will go on to explain some of the bullets. So, this first mandatory vaccination program in Greece took place during the Balkan Wars in 1913. The purpose of this vaccination program was the containment of the cholera epidemic, which outburst in the wide area of Macedonia and threatened to spread to the rest of the country because of the constant movement of soldiers, refugees, and prisoners of war. Mass vaccination of such kind were applied a few years later during mainly the First World War, are considered one of the main reasons for the limitation of epidemics in the front line, which were common during previous warfare. In early 20th century Greece, vaccination, as well as other medical and technological breakthroughs, were being accepted in many different ways by a heterogeneous society. The majority of the progressive bourgeois consented, endorsing the Western way of living. On the other hand, the large rural population, as well as the working class, remained confused and reluctant. Under the circumstances, the daily press took the stand as an advocate of progress and denounced the Oriental-like and slave-like characteristics of the people who haven't escaped the influence of the regressive Ottoman culture. The political and military authorities, in the context of modernization of Greek society, adopted these new health policies, and mandatory vaccination became part of the laws of the state. In this presentation, we are examining the first case of mass mandatory vaccination in Greece as a paradigm of how modern state gained legitimacy over health issues of its citizens, and how in particular this public health transition was orchestrated by the various social actors. Our research is based on medical and military archival sources, Greek newspapers of the time, the relative legislation of the Greek state, but also the personal diaries of soldiers and other people that were vaccinated. Our methodology is a comparative analysis of this diverse material in order to present vis-à-vis the propaganda tactics of the public opinion makers, the scientific discourse of the medical elite, as well as the public response to them. So this is the main idea of the paper. Now, I said a lot about the context of the Balkan Wars, so now I have some historical questions that I want to answer in this work. What was the role of the various agents, the military and state officials, the health professionals, the journalists and the press, the bourgeois, the peasants and the workers, the classes, let's say, and refugees and the minorities? This is a big question because, as I said before, the Macedonia area was not a homogeneous society. There was a lot of ethnic minorities. There was a lot of Bulgarians, Turks, Serbians, Albanians, Greeks, of course, Jews, a lot of Jews, and they were under the Ottoman Empire. They were all together, and now they have to be separated. So another thing is the question of about the prisoners of war. We don't have a many data about this, but we know that there were vaccinated by the Greek army. So about the sources, I spoke about the laws of the state, the army archives. They have a very good archives in the army, but they are mainly about the soldiers, not the people vaccinated. The daily newspapers, we have digital copies of the daily newspaper from Athens, the capital of Greece, Thessaloniki, the capital of Macedonia, Patras, which is a big city in west of Greece, and Piraeus, which is the port of Athens. We also have personal letters from soldiers, but also from officials, army officials and other officials, talking about the vaccination program. and diaries that soldiers and other people kept during the war. And we have a reference there about the vaccination program. And then, these are sources. And then we try to compare all these sources and to see how the official narrative fits with all these different sources. And then we try to documentate all the data that the official narrative gave, like the number of people vaccinated, or how it was done, or how many of the people were vaccinated mandatory or with consent, and everything. And as you can see, this is cholera cases per month in Thessaloniki by the military doctor that was there and was doing the vaccination program. This is the case, it's not the people who got vaccinated. And the official narratives tell us that about 500,000 people were vaccinated. From this, the 150,000 were soldiers and army officials, and the other was the people in Macedonia. They don't count in this number the people that were vaccinated in Athens, in other cities, voluntary. They only count the vaccination that was done by the army in Macedonia during the war. This was a big thing for the Greek doctors because it was the first time that these kind of programs were implemented during the war. Because of the constant movement, the cholera vaccination has to be in 2 doses. So they have to keep tracking of everyone that was vaccinated to have the second dose. And from the army archives, we see that in the army, there was the large percentage of the army was vaccinated 2 times, and it was very successful. But we don't have any data for the citizens, or the prisoners, of course. But we believe that in the same, let's say, practice, they do vaccinate 2 times the prisoners of war. And we don't know how they vaccinate the refugees or the people in the villages and the cities. So this is our open questions here. Another thing is the mandatory thing about the vaccination was only in the areas that were affected from the war in Macedonia, not in Athens, not in Patras, not in the rest of Greece, where it was only voluntary for the people to get a vaccine. So here comes the press. The press took the stand to pro-vaccination, and they have this narrative that is anyone who doesn't want to be vaccinated, it's like a public enemy, public danger, because it will affect all the society, it's a danger for the public health. And they also had a lot of articles from the Greek doctors explaining what is cholera, what is how the vaccine works. And they did all this work to convince the people to get vaccinated. But we have to keep in mind that during this time, in this time, the Greek literacy was very low. So not all the people can read newspapers. It's only for the elites, let's say. But saying that, we have to also say that if one person know how to read a newspaper, he was reading for all the people around. So maybe the news were traveling, even though they didn't have, they didn't know how to read. So the other very important thing in this study is that, as I say here, Was it a success story? It was used by the Greek Prime Minister not long before, in 2021, as an example of the Greek medicine. It's the first mass and successful vaccination in Greece, and he used it to convince people in Greece to get vaccinated. So it's always relevant, this kind of questions in Greece. And how many?
4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. So I will finish with some more remarks on the mass vaccinations as a public health technology of modern state, which is, I believe, the basic concept of my to conclude all this work. I believe that this is a great paradigm from this case, and it's also a counter paradigm for the center-based periphery narrative that says that Greece was in the periphery of science and medicine and everything, and now we see that this is a breakthrough from medicine, and it's in Greece, and not in the scientific centers of this age. And finally, I want to acknowledge the contribution of some of my colleagues here, that we worked together in the previous years for this work. That's from the University of Athens, Ariadne Fitopoulou, Thana Liberou, and Darcy Baku, and also Spirit Zokas, with whom we are working now together in the Institute of Mediterranean Studies for another project. But he also wrote this paper about the science and the technology in the Greek newspapers in the same area that I was studying. It was very helpful, and I think I'm finished.
Thank you. Thank you, Andreas. So, any questions?
Yeah, you talk about the newspaper. Do you know if there were posters at the time?
Poster?
Poster, like
Posters.
because it was sometimes very important.
Yeah, we didn't find it. Yeah, it's a very point. No.
And you're right, even if people couldn't read, they know someone could refer for them, of course, and they know the value of what has been written. If it's newspapers, they know it's in newspapers. If it's a contract, they know that it's a contract.
Yes.
John?
Yeah. Thank you. You have referred to different minorities in the area. Were they precisely targeted or not? My question is this one. And the other one is related to this. What about the languages used in these notes or in these oral messages for the population, for the civil population? Irrespective of the army, were there in one languages or in many?
Okay, very good question. In the first question about the minorities, yes, they were targeted, especially in Thessaloniki, where the majority were the Jews. They were considered a threat because of the way of life, and they were vaccinated first. And especially the Roma people, because of the constant movement, they also were a target, and they were not allowed to travel. And they were using all the languages of the area to communicate these things, and they were using the leaders of the minorities to implement these things.
Were they the confinement measures?
Not very much, because of the constant movement of the army. They couldn't implement and the quarantine zones and everything.
One question, Christian.
Do you know, very nice, very interesting. Do you know whether the data that they at the Pasteur Institute or at the medical in the military, was that used in form of clinical trials already as well, or not?
I understand. You're saying that if the medical data from the army?
No. The years 1912, 13, 14 is the time when the Pasteur Institute starts clinical studies with vaccines they're using for pneumonia, etc. And they're often in populations that are not in Paris, evidently, but can be Arab soldiers in the south of France and other places. And the question is, was Greece a place where, since this is 1912, 13, was that a place, did they produce data in form of trials, saying that we've got a group that is vaccinated, we've got a group that is not vaccinated, and we'll test whether that works? Because it's very much the period when the Pasteur Institute starts to do that. Yes. And it's often rather in the period, so Greece could be an example to study the cholera vaccine, for example.
We didn't find any direct proof of this, but we know that they used before they were making the Greek vaccine against cholera, they were using the vaccine from the Institute Pastel from Paris, but also from the other cards, from German institutes as well. So maybe because of the involvement of the Dr. Arnaud, maybe it will be this case, maybe, but we didn't have it in the Greek archives.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a question. Thank you very much for your presentation. You said that Greece was in the periphery. I wanted to know, I was wondering, who said that? It was official reports? Who said Greece was on the periphery?
Well, it was the general idea of the time. They were always saying that the center is Paris or Berlin or London. Their newspapers or the official language of the time, and also the foreigners, I think they saw Greece as periphery, as eastern periphery, not in the Western social culture, let's say, in the Western world.
So it was something you can see in the newspapers,
yes.
Some common knowledge.
Common knowledge, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, so I have, thank you very much, Andres. I have two questions. So the first one is it the Hafkin vaccine that they were using, or it's a new...
yes,
okay.
it's
okay.
the Hafkin.
Okay, so that's my second question. So because the Hafkin vaccine was...
The Greek, when they started producing their own vaccine, the Greek vaccine was Hafkin.
So it's the live vaccine?
Yeah.
It's not the heated one?
Yes.
Okay, so and then did you find some circulation of data from India to Greece, because the first place that this vaccine was tried was in Calcutta, and then it was not a big deal. It was not a big success there. It's different from the plague vaccine, but
it was a big deal because Professor Savas was the Greek professor of microbiology and public health. That was the head of all this program. Was writing papers about this, and the reference are with the trials in India.
Okay.
Quick question. Yes. Thank you, Andreas. It was a very nice overview, and I know it's very difficult speaking in English and capturing. I just want ask a little bit more about the relationship. So it was the army, the Greek army, that was responsible. So were there a dedicated team of, was it like an army medical department?
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about the relationship between civilian public health? That's the first question. And the second one is, forgive me, but I can't remember the historiography, but were there early examples of mass vaccination during or after war in the period of bacteriology, prior to the Balkan Wars? Are you aware of other mass vaccination campaigns run by military in other countries in this period? Or was this
not in Greece, in other countries?
Well, just generally, how does this fit with the historiography? of mass vaccination
Okay.
involving the army during or after war?
Okay, the first question is yes, there was a team. The Greek army had, as I said, 150,000 soldiers and officers, and 1,000 were the Greek doctors that were implemented this.
1,000.
Okay.
Wow.
And the second question, that covers the first question?
Well, but in relation to the public health and who was,
yeah.
yes, what was there a
Okay.
dialogue or kind of exchange
Yes.
of information?
This
knowledge?
is the beginning of the public health in Greece as a state project, not
So it's driven by the
philanthropic.
army?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. And the second one, I think the cholera vaccine was the first after the smallpox vaccine that
Mhm.
was in use in mass use.
Right, so like in the United States during the Revolutionary Wars, there was smallpox. Was used.
Not that big, only in India, and maybe there was some experiments prior to this period in Manila. I think there was an accident with the prisoners,
Right.
so they died. So it was not very good experiment.
So it sounds like you have a very well documented study of one of the earliest mass vaccination campaigns in war.
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
that's good.
Yeah, but we don't. One more, and we have to move. Yeah, I'm very strict, but. Okay. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much. So my question related also about the vaccination. So my first question is about how the living vaccine, live vaccine of the Hopkins and also killed vaccine of cholera from the German institute. So I was wondering if these different kind of vaccines were evaluated before the mass vaccination by Greek doctors. And it's just a comment, but for the kid vaccine, there was a mass vaccination in Japan in 1922, but for civil people, so not in the war context. But so I was wondering if this kind of data was also evaluated.
No, from the archives that we have, and they are very good from the army, they don't say which vaccine they use in which case. So we don't know where they use the Institut Pastel vaccine, we don't know where they use the other vaccines, and there was no pro-evaluation of the results. So it was a big experiment.
Maybe more comment. I mean, Greece was the first country that turned to the League of Nations for help to build up their.
Yes.
So I'm sort of surprised. I mean, this looks, as Mark said, this looks very, very advanced. So 15 years later, they make a case. They say, "Oh, we're a basket case. We need your help." So I wonder what happened.
The ISA minor disaster with 1,500,000 people,
because of the
refugees, the exchange of
Actually,
population, that was a very big thing. So that's why they asked for them.
But that was in like 2022. But they asked for help to build up the public health system in 27, and that was.
That was because of the dengue epidemic, the epidemic of dengue.
Yes.
How do you say fever?
Dengue fever, yeah.
Dengue fever.
Okay.
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 Another thing. So
Thank you very much, Andreas. So, the title is A Rockefeller Foundation in the Making of Modern Sanitation Science, a study of the hookworm campaign in China and India. The Rockefeller Foundation has been one of the most influential players since the early 20th century in the global development of public health, not only through their grant making, but also by shaping concepts and policies. Both China and India have been at the heart of Rockefeller philanthropy since the inception of the foundation. The hookworm campaign, being one of the first approaches of Rockefeller philanthropy, opened up the doors for the Rockefeller Foundation to exercise their newly found ideas in China and India. This opened up different avenues for the International Health Board to exercise their ideas to work. A detailed study of this anti-hookworm campaign in both countries will help us further understand the influence and effects of Rockefeller Foundation's philanthropy in disease control in both countries, and how this has shaped the policies that inform combating infectious diseases for decades. Hookworm as a disease was easily preventable. The challenge was to create awareness amongst the local populace. The larvae of hookworm enter the body through contact with soil. The leading cause for this was open defecation, which contaminates the soil and increases the risk of exposure to reinfection. The risk was greater for individuals who wore barefoot, which was a common sight in the plantation areas in most of the colonies. In addition, it required permanent sanitary infrastructure to avoid reinfestation. The idea was to convince the planters to install privies and borrow pits to avoid exposure to infection and engage them in the prevention of the disease. With his newfound knowledge, Frederick Gates of the Rockefeller Foundation was drawn to the challenge of addressing the disease. The campaign against hookworm in the southeastern United States, which happened to be the first hookworm campaign of the Rockefeller Foundation, was one of modern philanthropy's first forays into the public health realm. The hookworm campaign was also deemed a perfect fit due to its high infection rate globally that coincided with many tropical territories with increasing US interest. Rockefeller's philanthropic interest in the East reinforced the ideas of modern sanitation and hygiene. With its vast endowment and interest in public health, the foundation influenced a transition in the conceptualization of disease control. A more focused approach on building sanitary infrastructure and training the local Chinese and Indian population in the new discipline of hygiene became the central aim of their civilizing mission. By instilling public health awareness, the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission would impart public health training to the local political and medical elites with the hope that the locals would take over the responsibility of public health in the coming decades after the disbandment of the International Health Board. The expert dispatched to Asia revealed hookworm disease as an international problem with high prevalence and alarming in China and India. In the Indian context, hookworm was already a known disease, posing a threat to economic productivity because of colonial sanitary policies. However, in China there was very little knowledge about the disease. Modern public health took firm roots in China only with American intervention in the early 20th century, compared to India. Japanese influence in medicine in China was there, but not much in public health as in other areas of medicine. The colonial government in India did not prioritize public health because they were least interested in the health of the Indian population. So when the Rockefeller Foundation came with the funding, it worked out in their favor, mainly because hookworm as a disease were more prevalent in the labor population in plantations. Improving the health of this section of population would provide economic incentives to the colonial enterprise. With its vast endowment and interest in public health, the Foundation influenced a transition in the conceptualization of disease control, where a more focused approach on building sanitary infrastructure and training the local Chinese and Indian population in the new discipline of hygiene became the central aim of their mission. The stated aim was to, and I quote, promote public sanitation and the knowledge of scientific medicine throughout the world, end of quote. Attacking hookworm was not so much about the severity of the disease, rather it was about demonstrating strategies for disease control. Hookworm proved to be a cutting wedge for preventive medicine in the Orient. It gladly served as a convenient means to a larger end. Its nature, causes, and cure were readily understandable to a layperson, and its more significant effect on health was easily demonstrable. The scientific framework proposed by the International Health Board, replicated from the US South, faced challenges in this Indian and Chinese context. The whole campaign was designed within two strategies: deworming and introduction to sanitation. The hookworm campaign in both China and India was designed to bring the disease under control, particularly in plantation sites in India and mining colliery in China. The extraordinary sanitary conditions of the Tamil coolies settled in plantation sites in India and laborers in mining areas in China created ideal ecologies for reproducing the parasites and increased soil pollution levels. Just as the hookworm disease posed a threat to workers in the colonial plantations in India, it became a menace for mining workers in central and south China. Hookworm cases rising among the indentured labourers in British colonial plantations threatened labour productivity and the British colonial economy. In the plantations, the survey revealed that the primary carrier of hookworm disease were the Tamil labourers coming from southern India. In the plantation sites, due to the high demand for labour, colonial officials started hiring from the east, like China. However, since the Tamil labourers came from a full British colony, they were referred. The Chinese labourers were protected by organizations called Kongsi, or Brotherhood. The hookworm campaign started in the Madras Presidency of southern India, where most of the indentured labourers were coming from. In China, meanwhile, the Pingshan mining colliery was the Rockefeller Foundation's hookworm campaign target. It was easier to start a disease control program in a controlled population, like mining workers in China, since the huge rural population depended on night soil, which was a major fertilizer for the agricultural economy. In India, soil pollution was linked to access to water and proper sewage, primarily concentrated in European enclaves or houses of elite Indians. In China, night soil was the prime fertilizer, an essential part of Chinese agriculture, and any attempt to bring reform would have economic consequences. The anti-hookworm campaign did not last for long in the Chinese context, because of disease prevalence and distribution being scattered across provinces. However, in India, the IHD, the International Health Division, worked for a decade. In its report, it blamed the ignorance and lack of support from the Chinese and the Indians for its unsuccessful effort. In both cases, they did not achieve their prolonged targets of controlling the disease, but they successfully introduced modern concepts of hygiene and sanitation. So, the IHB anti-hookworm campaign opened the door for the Rockefeller Foundation to enter Asia to a large extent. The hookworm campaign did not achieve the goal of targeted control. Instead, cases of rising infections challenged their campaign. The Rockefeller Foundation realized that improving sanitation and hygiene was a long and challenging process. Sanitary surveys proved to be expensive and very slow. The sanitation program also excluded non-medical concerns like social, political, and economic, which were essential public health components. China and India offer different problems with the IHV-1 program. When the Rockefeller Foundation entered both countries, they came with a preconceived notion of modern medicine superiority, which removed all spaces of dialogue with an already existing indigenous system of medicine. The high value given to technological solutions to public health problems like hookworm missed the tree for the wood. Despite these disappointments, however, the legacies of the Rockefeller Foundation were significant. Positioned at the nexus of philanthropy, colonialism, modern science, and public health, the foundation built close ties with provincial governments and exerted extensive influence in the transformation of disease control in both India and China. The Rockefeller Foundation, through the Hookworm program, aimed to advance scientific medicine and develop sanitary science in both countries. The campaign had successfully instilled in the public interest in scientific medicine and public health, while encouraging programs in sanitation, which in the days to come will become the blueprint of public health in both countries. So, if anyone has questions, I can send to you send me by mail. Okay. So we move to the third poster. By Mater Duarte da Silva, who is a postdoc researcher by the Wellcome Trust in St Andrews University in the UK. So he will be talking about this topic, from universal rats to tropical sylvatic foci, animals, places and plague in Brazil, 1899-1955.
Okay, so thank you very much, Javier. Thank you for coming. And so, as Javier explained, this is an ongoing project. So it's a very big project, sponsored by the Wellcome Trust. I'd like to thank Mr. Wellcome for the money. So the project is based at the University of St Andrews, and the project is called the Global War Against the Rats and Epistemic Emergence of Zoonoses. And this talk that I will present to you is my part of research in this broad project, and I'm particularly interested in on the role of Brazil in constructing the idea of sylvatic plague and then sylvatic disease. And to start this presentation, I'd like to start with this source, this document, that was published in 1951 by a Brazilian doctor called Roland Simon. Yeah, he had a very French name, but he was from the northeast of Brazil. And that's the first time he was he was a doctor in the Plague National Service, so the Serviço Nacional de Peste. And he tried to explain, maybe for the first time in Brazil, a kind of the evolution of plague in Brazil since the first moment that plague arrived in Brazil in 1899 until 51. So, and according to Simon, there were 5 steps, 5 phases in these in the evolution of plague in Brazil. So the first one is the port phase. So plague was in Rio and Santos, so around the Brazilian coast, and then plague goes to the hinterland of Brazil, but still in the city. So what he called the urban phase, and then you have the rural phase, so the fase rural. And then that's kind of reasoning you can find in other places, in Argentina, for instance, in South Africa. But here he invented 2 new steps. So according to Simon, what was happening in Brazil in 51 what he called fase rural campestre. I think it's difficult to translate it in English, but it would be an in-between phase between the rural phase and the new phase that was the Sylvatic one. So, and then the campestre is like the border between a farm and a wild space. And then there was the next, the last phase of plague that he called peste selvática, or that we can try to translate in English as Sylvatic plague. And for him, it would be the last phase in Brazil. It's a kind of prophecy. So there is no Sylvatic plague in Brazil in 51, but for him it's a kind of prophecy. We can forecast it. It will arrive unless we try to control the plague now. So it's and the problem for him is the Sylvatic plague is the plague in the Amazon, in the tropical forest. So it's the plague of it's the jungle plague. Okay. So what I would like to do today is, starting from this kind of reasoning and using his categories, think about the history of plague in Brazil, and to talk about three transitions in the history of plague in Brazil. So the first one is what he's talking about is a kind of geographical or epidemiological transition from a place to another place, from huge outbreaks to very scattered case. Okay, that one, he talked about that. But I think using these source, we can also talk about two other transitions. And the second one is a kind of nationalization of plague in Brazil. So I argue that at the beginning, plague was seen in Brazil, at least, as a kind of universal or global disease. And then at this moment, plague is seen as a kind of national disease that should be faced by the Brazilian government as a national problem. And I argue that there is a third transition going on here that I try to call a kind of epistemological transition or ecological transition. Then we pass from very basic explaining for the epidemic, for plague, based in the idea of rat, fleas, and humans, for a very complex ecological web of relationships between animals, between rodents, wild rodents, wild ectoparasites, domestic rats, their fleas, and humans. So a very complex system, and this complexity we can see here in the two last phases of the rural campestre and the Sylvatic plague. Okay, but I will start from the beginning, from the urban port phase. So just to summarize to you, plague became or was rediscovered as a global problem in 1894 in Hong Kong. And from Hong Kong, plague spread from all around the world. It's the first time that plague arrived in South America, in South Africa, and also in the United States, and it came back to Europe, Porto in Portugal. There was a huge outbreak there. So, and plague arrived in Brazil at the end of 1899 in Santos, and then in Rio de Janeiro. So, and during these first moments of this pandemic, it's the first time that the rat is associated with plague. So in the Middle Age, nobody, and also in the modern times, nobody was talking about rats when talking about plague. So the problem of rats is because the rats, they act as a kind of a vermin, a parasite, because they eat food, but not because they transmit disease. That's quite new. That's something that appears at the end of the 19th century. Especially in India, and also in Hong Kong, but also in India, especially in India, because people start to notice that you can have episodics of rats before a human outbreak, and also thanks to microbiology, you can identify the same bacillus inside the rat body and also inside the human body. So there's a kind of connection between rats and humans, but there is a huge controversy to understand what is exactly the role played by rats in plague. So, and in 1898, Paul Louis Simon, so the French a French Pasteurian. He went to Bombay, he stayed in India 2 years, and then there, thanks to his connections with the British doctors, he arrived to create a theory, a hypothesis that the flea is the vector, is the missing link between rats and humans. And because the flea is what is the vector of plague, we can try to control plague by killing rats and killing fleas. But that's a huge controversy. The British, they don't believe in Simone. For instance, but I think the British, they were right, because it's like a very, very small experience that Simone made in India. But anyway, there is an association created at this moment that the rats, they are in a way implicated in the pandemic, but we don't know how exactly is this role. But we started to think that maybe the rats, they are playing a role. And then in this first phase of the pandemic all around the world, you have this called the war against the rats. Because the place that were hit by plague, the idea is if you fight the rats, you can control plague. And we can see it in Hanoi, we can see it in Cape Town, in San Francisco, and I argue in Rio de Janeiro. But I think in Rio de Janeiro, there is two important difference here. But I will start by the beginning. So until 1903, there is no fight against the rat in Rio, because the government thinks it's quite expensive to fight the rats. Nobody knows if it will control the disease. But then 1903, there is a new guy arrived which was the Minister of Health. It was called the Diretoria Geral de Saúde Pública. And this guy called Oswaldo Cruz, it's a kind of a Brazilian pasteur, he decides to fight the rats. And I put here some images about that, because the idea to fight the rats is the government will buy rats hunted by the population. So the population of Rio will chase rats and will kill them and will sell them to the government. And of course, as you can imagine, I'm from Rio de Janeiro, okay? So I'm joking about my city and my people. They started breeding rats and create a kind of so these caricatures here, they talk about that. So that sometimes, so for instance here, it's written in Portuguese that you need to know if the rat was born in Rio, because so if you can prove that the rat was born there, you can have money from the government. But this kind of policy stayed in Rio during 10 years. So because you can find this kind of reasoning in Hanoi, for instance. But in Hanoi it was 1 year, in San Francisco 1-2 years. But in Rio it's during 10 years. There is a huge fight against the rat. So, and then you can see the statistics, they will put it in the statistics that they were killing like 500,000 rats per year. So I think that's the first novelty of Rio. And the second one is, we are not talking about a small village. We are talking about a city, which was the capital of Brazil. 1 million people were living there. So, and the Brazilians, they noticed it, that what they were doing in Rio, and because associated with the fight against the rat, there was plague was going down. There was a decrease of cases of plague in Rio. So there was a huge association that because we are killing the rats, then we are controlling rats. Then we are controlling plague. And then it can become a kind of a model to the rest of the world that it's possible to control plague by destroying rats. And Rio proves it, or in the Brazilian discourse. So it's a kind of, it's a proof for the Brazilian doctors here, it's a proof of modernity. So Brazil is modern, it's not European, but we can be a kind of model to the rest of the tropical world, like for Africa, for Asia, because so it's possible to manage a pandemic with being in the tropics without being a colony. And for instance, this kind of discourse was repeated by the Brazilian doctors, for instance, at the Office International d'Hygiène Publique. And then the fight against rat in Rio became a kind of global model that we could support. And for instance, Paris was hit by plague in 1920, La Peste des Chiffonniers, and these same things were reproduced in Paris. You can also find a kind of a rat market in Paris, but it was a small outbreak, while in Rio that was a big one. Okay, so, and then in parallel with this discourse that plague was under control in Rio, there is this idea that, okay, we managed to solve the problem and now plague will disappear from Brazil. And then the reality hits back because in the 20s, plague starts going on to the hinterland of Brazil. Okay, just 5 minutes. Wow. So, and then plague will pop up in medium cities, but also in the farms. And that is a different question because you cannot reproduce the same measures that we are doing in Rio in the farms. So, and then there's a new question so the first one is what the measures that we can do to fight plague in the farms. So for instance, the Brazilian government will decide to use flamethrowers, no? A machine that will create a flame, like in the war, to kill the rats in the rural area. But because plague is no more in a port, plague is now in a very large area of Brazil, in a very rural area of Brazil, in the northeast of Brazil, larger than Spain or France. So the problem is how can you fight it without a national system? Because until 1920, there was no national public health in Brazil. The public health was completely decentralized. And then after the Spanish flu, there is a first effort to create a kind of national system in Brazil. But it's after 1930, because in 1930 there is a revolution in Brazil. For some, it's a kind of the bourgeois revolution in Brazil that will create a new system, a new government in Brazil. And this government will try to nationalize public health. And one symbol of this nationalization is the creation in 1941 of the Plague National Service. But we also have a yellow fever national service, a malaria national service. Okay, and this Plague National Service, its role is to fight plague in this very large area of the northeast of Brazil. And it's in that part of Brazil that they started to noticing that the problem of rats is still there, but you can notice that other rodents are in a way associated with the outbreaks. So for instance, I will just say the names in Portuguese, but you cannot imagine these animals, but for instance, here is a punarea, you have punarea, mocó, prea. So a lot of rodents that lives in this frontier between the wild place and the farms, the Plague National Service starts to assess if they are implicated with plague or not. And then, starting in 1951, the Plague National Service will try to collect rodents from the northeast of Brazil and send them to the National Museum in Rio to establish the possible connections between these rodents and plague. So that's the biggest collection of rodents in South America, maybe the biggest in the world, but I would say South America just to say there. Because you know, we Brazilians, we have this tendency to think we are the center of the world, not the periphery. So, and for a good thing, this collection of rodents survived the fire that destroyed the museum, because you know, in 2018, there was this big fire, the museum disappeared. But this collection was in another building, and this building survived, and this is my picture, I was there last month. So the Plague National Service then collects 60,000 specimens of rodents. And what they discover is that, yes, so there is these, so the rodents, they are implicated in the plague in this kind of association that was called the rural compact. But then and I will finish. And then it's precisely at this moment there is the idea that plague can be controlled, but if not, plague will arrive at the Amazon jungle, and then in the Amazon jungle there will be a kind of a permanent reservoir of Sylvatsky plague. And I think here we have a difference from the Sylvatsky plague, for instance, in the United States, in California, that Mark worked about. Because, for instance, in California, the problem is in the desert. That's the origin of the concept that was created by the Portuguese doctor Ricardo Jorge, the peste sylvática. Because for Ricardo Jorge, the Sylvatsky plague is the plague in a kind of a desert stepped environment. And then we can have it in California, in a way. California and South Africa were the models. While here in Brazil, we are talking that to be considered as a Sylvatsky plague reservoir, it should be in the Amazon jungle. We cannot have it in a wide space, for instance, in the Brazilian desert, which is this place here, where they found the Campestre. But there is a kind of a new, but a forecasted, I imagine, place where plague can be as a reservoir. And I think that it's not just they are not playing with words here. There is a new idea that the Amazon jungle can become this reservoir, and I think it's linked to the idea of Sylvatic yellow fever, because the Sylvatic yellow fever is the yellow fever in the jungle among monkeys, and because yellow fever is so much more important in Brazil than plague, I think the idea of Sylvatic yellow fever predates the idea of Sylvatic plague, and thanks to that there is an invention of a new idea, of a new concept in Brazil of the Sylvatic plague, which is the jungle plague. Okay, and to conclude, otherwise Javier will kill me. I think we have here a transition of places that are seen as a kind of a source of infection. So the port, the city, and then and the farm, and then this imagined space, imagined landscape, which is the Amazon. But there is this transition, but there is some actor that is in all the face. That's the rat. So in a way, the rat gives a kind of a coherence to this change. And the only place that the rat would be absent is in the last phase. But since it's just a prophecy, so it's the rat that connects all these moments. And I think so. I think we have here a much more like an ecological explanation that in a way connects to other places of the world, to explain plague in a more complex way. And as I said, there is a new invention here, an invention of a new idea of Sylvatic plague that I will try to explore more in my research. Thank you very much. Sorry.
Thank you. Mateus, questions?
No? Okay. Thank you very much for this presentation. I have 3 questions. I'll try a short question, I think. First thing, I was very interested by your presentation on geographical aspect, but I have a question about sources, archives. So if you can explain a little bit more about what are the sources for this. I know it's difficult. And so my second question is about the word you used, reservoir. And I wanted to know if it's something they used at the time. And my third question is also related. Of course, in your introduction and your own presentation, we are seeing the way, a lot of connection with the way we define today the zoonotic disease. So this relation between farm and water, environment, reservoir. So I was wondering if you can explain a little bit more this connection, maybe.
Okay.
Telegraphic.
Okay, telegraphic. Okay. So for the first moment, all the source are a kind of official source produced by the which was called the Diretoria Geral de Saúde Pública, and also what we can find in newspapers and so on. So for that part here, I'm still struggling to find the official archives of the Plague National Service. I applied for a kind of information service in Brazil, but it's like I wanted to know top secret archives, so they don't allow me to see that. So this is what it's possible to find. So for instance, some works published by some doctors, and also the personal archives of some doctors that work in the Plague National Service. And for the last phase, though, the sylvatic phase, I think one of the sources are the animals. So the collection of the objects, which are the animals taxidermized, I think they are also source for that. Okay, we can discuss more about that, but I think the animals can be a kind of source. They are there. They can be. They can tell something. The second question about the reservoir. So that's a big debate. So the first time that someone will claim that the rat is a reservoir of plague, of urban plague, it's in 1920. It's a little bit after the plague outbreak in Paris. So that's the first time that, okay, the rat is the reservoir of plague, not that the rat is a reservoir of disease. And so here in 51, they use the term reservoir, and also to talk about the white rodents. Okay, the concepts there in a clear way. And about the zoonosis, so I think that's the idea of the project, is to tell how. Because the question with plague is that first it's a global pandemic that's going on outside of Europe. We are not talking about Europe here, or Siberia, of course, but I mean Western Europe. And then you have this experience going on also in California, but also in South Africa, in Brazil. So that's my tendency to answer that it's a much more global construction of the idea of zoonosis, and because we have the rats and the rodents, because, okay, these also, in Brazil, this is also the moment of the fight against yellow fever, and the fight against yellow fever is the fight against the mosquito. But as they said, all these actors, they acknowledge it. It's much easier to kill a mosquito than to kill a rat, because a rat, the animal, it's smart. It can know, it can try to contour the measures made by the government, and while the mosquito is just a stupid animal that you can get rid of them. But you need to negotiate with the rat in a way. Okay, in a very telegraphic way. Sorry.
So more questions. Telegraphic tips and telegraphic answers. So short.
Yeah, it's very short. Because you said that Brazil authorities wanted to become like a role model for the tropical or other countries. Did it happen?
I think not about plague, but I think for other kind of disease, for instance, the yellow fever, Brazil was seen as even for the French. So the French, they sent a mission to Brazil to study the yellow fever there in Rio de Janeiro. So they say Mission Marchou. So they stay there 5 years, and so I think there was a kind of a model, and a practical model, so we can apply the measures made in Brazil in other places. In South America was like that, but also in a kind of a rhetorical way that you can have tropical medicine without being a colony. So because in Brazil, because in Europe and in the colonies, tropical medicine is always seen as a kind of a tool of empire. While in Brazil, tropical medicine was seen as a kind of a tool for modernity. Well, we are in the tropics, we cannot change it. But we can, so the problem is not the tropics, the problem is the mosquito. So if you can get rid of the mosquito, you can live in the tropics as a kind of a utopia, a tropical utopia. And I think they were right. If we can control all the disease in Rio de Janeiro, of course Rio de Janeiro is much better than London or Paris. So.
No?
I think Mark?
No, it's John, Mark, and Neta, and just short, please.
As for your stimulating paper, I like very much all this presentation in 3 stages for coping with the plague. I would like to ask you whether you have thinking or you are contemplating the fact that in all these stages there is also an evolution between originally a bacteriological conception of plague to an disease ecology conception of plague.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's what I call like a third transition, a kind of an epidemiological reasoning. That's, yeah, I think in that moment we have, so bacteriology can explain very well the fact that the bacillus will jump from the fleas to the rats and so on. Well, here we have, maybe we can discuss it later, that with the idea of modern ecologies, it's emerging at this moment. So, and Charles Elton also talked about sylvatic plague, and it was a kind of. So I think what we are seeing here is also the shift in the discipline in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that Brazil is the first to invent it. What I'm trying to show is that there is something going on in Brazil that in a way mirrors, connect with other discussions in England, in South Africa, in California. So, and I think it's this shift to a more ecological explanation.
In France.
In France, yeah.
Yes. No, it's the geography, medical geography as a point in between all these the two conceptions. Yeah, that is I think very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mark?
I can tell you're getting anxious. Just very interesting. On this subject of networking, forgive me because I don't remember, it's a long time since I was studying carpooling. But have you found he corresponded with people all over the world? Did he correspond with your Brazilian Sylvatic research? Did you see any intellectual exchanges?
So, for instance, I will talk about Charles Elton, no?
Elton,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So he wrote to Elton.
Okay. So Elton, he was. I found some letters from Ricardo Jorge, so the Portuguese guy, to Elton, and some connections between them. And Elton, he was in Brazil. He visits Brazil, but the Amazon, I think it was after the Second World War.
Oh, right.
So, but I'm still. So next week I'm going to Oxford to see his archives again. So I'm trying to find these connections, but not from the Brazil. So in Brazil I didn't find anything.
But what I'm saying is that Meyer is the first person to really use this.
Okay, yeah.
So is there a correspondence between Meyer and
yeah, but I think Meyer is not the first one. I think Ricardo Jorge is the first.
So did Meyer speak to Jorge?
Yeah, so because Ricardo Jorge invented the concept in 1927,
okay,
and Meyer used it in 35. So the Sylvatic Plague Committee.
So he did correspond.
Yeah. So there is this correspondence between Jorge, Elton, and Meyer.
Right.
From the Brazilian side, so Elton was there, but I didn't find anything about Brazil and Meyer.
Really,
but the idea of that California is a kind of model to think about the northeast of Brazil. That thing I found, but not they were not correspondent with Meyer, but they were reading and use it as a kind of a model.
Okay. Last very short.
Okay, so my first question was actually related to earlier two questions. I was wondering how much it was really considered like a global problem, because I know like global health institutions were really interested in tropical medicine and tropical climate. So intellectual ideas, but how much like European or Westerners came to this medicine, came to this area to help to solve this problem before it's like too late. And the second one was maybe really short about if there was research about how killing and hunting rats was actually changing and influencing the patterns of spread of plague, because I'm sure it had, or other diseases, I don't know.
Okay, okay, to be very short. So plague was not seen as a tropical disease per se at the beginning. So, and for instance, the Europeans, they were very interested in that, so they sent a lot of missions to Bombay. There was a French mission, Italian mission, a Russian mission, and so on and so on. So they were quite afraid because they thought that, okay, plague will arrive in Europe because it's a kind of a global, universal. They use much more the term, it's a universal disease than a tropical disease. But I think it's much more it's later in the century that plague can be a kind of tropical disease, and it's framed like that. And the discussion about killing rats, how can you also spread other disease? So that's a problem, because if you kill a rat and the flea bites you, maybe it's much worse to kill the rat than to let the rat alone. So there were a lot of debates if the fact that killing rats is not spreading plague and okay.
Okay, so
thank
you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for these fantastic days. I'm going to present myself. I'm Victoria. Well, my name is Sofia Sanchez. I am a scientific journalist in charge of the communication of the COVID project. This is a research project of the University of Lleida in Catalonia. I'm accompanied by Dr. Victoria Armario. She is a postdoctoral researcher in the Plant Biotechnology Group at the University of Lleida, a member of the COVID Project 2. We are here to present the COVID Museum, a virtual museum on pandemics seen from three perspectives: art, science, and society. So our poster is about communication and dissemination on history of pandemics. First of all, I would like to briefly introduce you to our research project. COVID is a multidisciplinary initiative that wants to promote scientific education and communication about COVID to the general public. We organize scientific workshops for students in the labs, educational talks in different towns, roundtables with experts, and other dissemination activities in the University of Lleida. About the COVID Museum, our initiative, the idea of making it arose in 2020 when the Generalitat de Catalunya announced its pandemics funding call. Then a multidisciplinary group of researchers of the University of Lleida thought it was important to create a virtual museum on pandemics as an educational tool. Also, with the scientific background they had, they arrived to the conclusion that scientific education about pandemics must be based on social sciences and not only in medical concepts related to medicine or environmental concepts. For this reason, we're here today representing a group of investigators, experts in history of medicine, natural sciences, nursing, education, or communication, and we have created our website that is www.ilercovidmuseum.com. So as you can see, there is a scientific poster, a type of more scientific poster. I will show you now the website. Our virtual museum has two objectives. One is to inform people about the pandemics on history, and the second one is to create a forum, a website, a forum to stimulate interdisciplinary research on pandemics. About the technical aspects, our work has been coordinated by Dr. Albert Roca, that is an expert on history of pandemics of the University of Lleida. During 9 months, we have been working in this COVID Museum with a company that is called In Situ. They are experts in cultural heritage. And we decided to use the WordPress content management system. I don't know if you know what is WordPress, but it's very easy to create websites with WordPress. we have been working with them, and we have done the contents, all the contents in Catalan language. We are going to translate it to Spanish and English, but now we are in the initial phase. We have done all the contents in Catalan because our main public of the project is Catalan. So now I'm going to show you the most important part, that is how we have concepted or explained the pandemics in our virtual museum. Our virtual museum has collected 7 pandemics. Maybe some of them can be for you strange or not, but tooth decay is the first one, the pandemic of the Neolithic, Black Death, smallpox, cholera, Spanish flu, AIDS, and COVID-19. As I told you, each pandemic is seen from 3 perspectives. About the scientific one, we offer medical information and historical information about the vector of each pandemic, how it is spread, its symptoms, treatment, outbreaks, etc. This is the result of an extensive bibliographical research in historical documents for part of the Dr. Albert Roca, his historian of medicine. Regarding the artistic perspective, for each pandemic we have selected different paintings or graffitis of international artists to show how the pandemic affected society or a person individually. The paintings are collected in a 3D room called permanent exhibition. And for the society perspective, we consider the most important part of this museum is this part of learnings. Of each pandemic, we have collected and tried to transmit information and reflections about scientific, medical, and historical learnings of each pandemic. For example, we have learned to use masks. We have learned we have discovered that there are relationships between pandemics and political changes, economical changes. It's a space of reflection. As you can see, I have put them information about the cholera pandemic, but I prefer to show you the virtual museum in our personal computers because it's not open, it's not public yet. So I will let you my personal computer. Sorry, I know this is very bad for the streaming, but just one moment. You can pass it if you want, and you can see the different okay. So now you can see this. This is our work. It's as I said, a multidisciplinary research, and most of the research maybe a space to create debate and education. It's an ongoing project. We are doing it now. It's not open, but I hope that you can show me how to improve this and how to use it as a communication tool. This is our main goal. So we are now preparing to now a photographic exhibition in the Hellenic Museum where we collect our own photographies of researchers of the plant biotechnology group because they are working with the COVID-19 virus in the laboratory. So we have made a photos about how is a day in a research work with COVID-19 to give transparency to people, to make them know that research about COVID-19 is not a thing that is maybe occult, you know, it's transparent. So in conclusion, we don't have conclusions, but because we are doing it now, that we think that this virtual museum could be a unique tool to communicate the history of pandemics, uniting science and art. Now I would like to invite you to the opening of the museum. We are organizing on May 18, that is the International Day of Museums, at 5 p.m., a webinar, an online webinar, with international speakers such as Maria Conforti, she's the director of the Sapienza Museum of Italy, Alfonso Zarzoso, director of the Museum of History of Medicine in Catalonia, or Josep Simon, that has been here with us those days. He's the curator of the Museum of History of Medicine and Science in the University of Valencia. So this is our work. I hope you like this, and you can see it in our PC. So we are open to questions. Remember that I'm no researcher, but I would like to try to speak with you and show you our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, any questions? No.
Thank you very much. Just a little question. Are you considering to use film too? You were talking about art, images, maybe film.
Yeah.
You have a lot of medical film too.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah, in our 3D room, it's like a permanent exhibition of a museum. We have a lot of sources. We can put links, films, images. So we are not considered to do our own film, but just to project in the virtual museum films of other artists or scientifics related with pandemics, of course. Yeah.
Just a question about your COVID digital. So you've got some examples of laboratory research. What are you showing related to COVID in society and what other objects or
Exactly. This is the most difficult part for us because we have discovered that obviously we are in the COVID-19 pandemic, so to have art paintings or pieces of art related with COVID is difficult because the privacy data and the legal aspects of having a piece of art are different. We have collected all paintings because we asked to the University of Lleida, to the legal department, if we had to pay for using paintings, for example, La Cholera, Quebec, or other paintings. And they say that no, because we are a university, we have educational objectives. But with the COVID-19, we are having problems. We are collecting information about the World Health Organization, about the scientific aspects, but with the art pieces, we are having problems because some artists are selling their pieces of art now. So we're having problems with the art aspects or the art contents related with COVID-19. Maybe some graffitis or something like that, but it's difficult to find about COVID. It's not done yet. It's the most difficult for us to do the information about COVID.
Just very quickly, just last week, I was at the Science Museum in London, where they have actually been buying art that was created during the pandemic to exhibit permanently. So they've been doing the same work as you should talk.
Well, thank you very much. I will do so.
Leah?
Yeah, my question is actually related to what was just said, because I think you told me you thought you were the first such a virtual museum in the world. Do you know if there are other projects elsewhere, or do you have contact with them or anything like that?
Not yet, because I have discovered that there were a lot of initiatives when the COVID pandemic started to do Instagram, for example, an Instagram with paintings of people that were anonymous like us or not famous. But we have not contacted yet with people or other artists or initiatives, and we know that there are some research groups doing something like us, but not yet. We will speak with people to create synergies, I don't know, some collaborations.
I have a question before. After.
Thank you.
I don't have very clear what is the public of this museum, because you said it's an educational initiative, so I may think of the students of the University of Lleida or in the Catalan area.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because the kind of images, for example, you use do you use with local links or the information about outbreaks of plague, etc.? Is it linked to local experiences, so an outbreak of plague in Lleida or in Catalonia, or you are preparing like a museum for general public? So,
thank you. We have an educator, professor of the University of Lleida, and we try to create like courses or to do students and teachers of the high schools to study the museum maybe in one class with the teachers. We are creating educational content on this virtual museum. Now it's focused in Lleida because it is in Catalan and the project is Catalan, so we are focused on people in Lleida. Maybe students, not of the university, or maybe of the high schools, exactly. But it is growing now. So we are thinking now in how to disseminate this to arrive maybe to older people, but mainly in Catalonia. We will translate it probably. The final of the project is on this May of November, so this year in November. So we will try to translate it, but we are finalizing the project, so, so we are focusing Catalonia.
Do you have a project with school?
We are now...
To engage school with you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. We are doing a lot of dissemination activities in the project, not only with the virtual museum. We are doing a lot of scientific workshops in the labs, and we are speaking with them, with the students and the teachers that have come to our scientific workshops to present them the virtual museum on May 18th, and to organize with them maybe an exploratory phase of how to teach the history of pandemics in classes and why to study them, because some teachers they told us that they educate on history, but not in history of pandemics. It is curious. We are doing it now. It's an ongoing project, so...
Yeah, but I was also thinking about pupils, not really students. But maybe it's too early for that. But for myself, I was thinking of, I only want to work on project with researchers and maybe pupils, to ask questions. Do you remind this word that you see, test randomisé? What does it mean? Do you remember this? And you could be able to show an archive, you could be able to use content to produce your own dictionary, such like that.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. Look, we are doing it now, and I will be grateful if you can please write to us these comments, because they will help us a lot. We have ilercovid at udl.com, and please send us your comments, because maybe I cannot answer you properly now.
I think that the purpose it's digital, but at the moment you need to bring people together.
Exactly.
To work with people. So.
Exactly. We are doing it now, but the courses is finalizing in June in Spain, so we are running. Thank you.
One question and one proposal from more work.
Thank you.
But I have, maybe I haven't understood properly, but you have talked of objects from the COVID. It's something you have tried, are you trying to do? Just in a project we did with Mito Collective, we were supposed to work with a collection, but finally we didn't do because it was too complicated for them and for us. But with MUBA, Museum of History of Barcelona, they have a huge collection of objects from the pandemic. I don't know what it is, but they said it's a huge thing.
Okay.
So
thank you. I will consider it. Yeah.
This one, the question was, what it seems now it's a permanent collection, but I think will you make a temporary exhibition, because this is a very in the what Bibliothèque Nationale de France did. It's I think it's a good example of these temporary exhibitions that are very, very interesting. Temporary, that being in the web, they don't need to be temporary.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
but it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea.
Exactly. No, thank you. Yes, it's true. We are asking now for more budget to continue doing the.
It's a question of budget.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's of time and budget, but we would like to do the COVID Museum permanent, to organize more and more activities, and yeah.
And for the artists, maybe you have to. It depends on the artists and on the for the rights, because maybe you can link to their web pages.
Exactly.
So, and don't have it. So you can make an exhibition with links to their web pages, and you don't have the problem of rights.
Yeah, it's true.
With contemporary artists, with other things that are owned by collectors, it's another question.
It's another question. It's true. Thank you.
Living artists.
I know. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, so we finished. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we are moving to have our coffee break.
Thank you.
And please remember our 4 guest speakers and the young scholars. We will later participate in this mentoring session. And we are going to tell you where exactly, so don't worry. But we have a couple of possibilities.